So without further ado, I would like to introduce Professor Bryan Carr. He's one of our professors in the Communications Department and also Women and Gender Studies. All right. Woo!
Let's adjust our expectations accordingly, please. I would like an orderly session here. I love this venue, by the way. This is like we're one brick wall away from this being evening at the Improv. And like none of you get that joke, but trust me, it's really funny. Okay, so thank you all for coming out. I'm glad you're all here. Those of you especially who are here for this event, I'm also glad for those of you who are here for something completely different and didn't know you're getting roped into a lecture. So I apologize for that, but hopefully you'll learn something too. And for those of you here for extra credit, I love you guys too. Thank you. Yeah, that's most of you, right? All right, well, tonight, here's how tonight's going to go. I'm going to talk a little bit about my research. I'm going to talk a little bit... okay, yeah, it's good. We're breaking the fourth wall. Hi. So I'm going to talk a little about some of my research. I am, as you might imagine, and this will be a shock to you from a guy who owns a Metroid t-shirt, I am kind of a dork, okay? And I have decided to devote my adult life to studying things of various levels of dorkitude. Whether that is comic books, which I do a lot of work with, so I'm eyeing the Avengers pillow over there. If you guys get it before I do, great, congratulations. I also do a lot of work with video games. In fact, my dissertation was on video games, gamer identity, and that sort of thing, which is why they brought me here. So here's how this is going to work. I'm going to kind of run through this little spiel I've got. I'm planning to talk for about like 30-35 minutes. The rest of the time we'll probably just talk about video games. You guys can ask me questions about what I talked about in this speech. You can ask me anything about the industry, my thoughts on it, or we can just kind of talk about which of the Mega Man games is the best one. It's two. It's always two. Okay? Some of you might disagree and you're wrong. I'm sorry, but that's just the way it is. All right, so I want to start off by asking you guys a question. What is a gamer? Okay, all of you at once. Okay, so we have a person who plays video games up here in the back. What would you say?
Awesome.
Awesome? Okay. Well, maybe a little self-interest there. What else? Anybody else got kind of a thought? When I say the word gamer, what comes to mind? Person who plays games all day. Not just plays games, plays them all day. Okay? So we've got some kind of varying ideas of what a gamer... Yeah, go ahead. Okay, lots of different kinds of games. I'm noticing a pattern here. I'm not hearing a lot of the stereotypes. For example, when we normally think of the way that gamers are portrayed in the media, we get something kind of like...
I can be it.
Okay, great. Okay, so we actually get something kind of like on the left there. That's my right. I guess that would be your left. I don't really know directions anymore. That, of course, is the gamer Warcraft nerd from the South Park episode, Make Love, Not Warcraft. Okay? That has kind of been the sort of general depiction of gamers, of people who play games for a very, very long time in the media, and honestly in our culture in general. Okay? And I always knew that I wasn't like that, right? I play video games. I grew up in video games. I got yelled at by the manager of a Little Caesars for hitting the buttons on the Street Fighter II machine too hard. And in my defense, how else was Chun-Li going to do the hurricane kick? Okay? It doesn't work. It doesn't work unless you hit it as hard as you can. Okay? But increasingly, what we're seeing is that the idea of what a gamer is changing. Okay? On the other picture I have, we have a group of relatively well-adjusted people. They may or may not actually be playing a video game. That's the fun of stock photography. But they're diverse. They're all having fun. They're sociable. They're not the guy on the other side. Again, I'm not going to bother with directions. And that's kind of the image the industry wants. However, that's come with its own sort of set of problems. We'll come back to that in a moment, okay? But I've thrown the word identity around. In fact, it's right in the beginning of this presentation. I want to give you a little bit of an idea of what that actually means, okay? So this is the academic portion of the evening. Let's talk about this concept of identity. Identity as we normally think of it, is essentially who we are, right? Sometimes identity is public, sometimes, like Bruce Wayne, it is secret. But it is part of who we are, yet. And so we think of identity as something we have, right? It belongs intrinsically to us. And that kind of influences a lot of how the gamer identity develops. In reality, our identities are essentially what we call rhetorical constructs, okay? They are created through this process of communication, of socialization, okay? We are told by others who we are, okay? And we have a certain idea of who we are, but when we come into contact with others, we not only have certain roles we're expected to fulfill, there are certain expectations placed on us, okay? By virtue of being a professor, I'm expected to be X, Y, and Z. By virtue of being a white man, I'm expected to be X, Y, and Z, and so on and so forth. And it varies and it changes depending on who you are, your specific experience. That is kind of this whole discussion of intersectionality, all right? Ethnicity, gender, profession, religion, all of these things combine to make us who they are. So identity is multifaceted. And it happens on both the individual level and the socialized level. Okay? So we are not only identifying ourselves by who we are part of a group with, okay? I am a gamer, therefore I am with all of these gamers. And this is what a gamer is, and this is what a gamer isn't. But also how society sees us. Are we the Warcraft guy, or are we the fun, multicultural, good times group? Okay? That's the question we have to ask. And so this is both an internal question and an external question. Okay? But I want to impose upon you, if I will for a moment, that identity is not just something we have, it's also something we perform, it's something we do. By virtue of existing and talking and being who we are, we have these certain kind of depictions that we present of ourselves, okay? And we have different roles that we fill in different situations. When I'm hanging out with my nieces, I'm Uncle Bryan. I'm the big, dorky, fun one with all the money who takes them out to the movies and so on and so forth. When I'm with my wife, it depends on the day. When I'm in the classroom, I'm Professor Carr. You know, the guy is kind of fun to listen to for about 5 minutes and he sort of just kind of do something else. I get it, okay? I've been there. But these identities are all part of what makes me me, right? They just change depending on the situation, and gamer is one of them. Now, this becomes interesting because we so closely identify who we are with this particular medium. You will notice that the word gamer has no analog for any other medium. There is no such thing as a movieer. There is no such thing as a booker. You guys can call yourself a reader, but who honestly does that? There's no such thing as a musicer, so on and so forth. But we call ourselves a gamer, in part because to game is a verb, but also because it's very closely identified with who we are. Maybe we grew up and people didn't always like us. Okay, we weren't the popular kids in class, wasn't going out on a lot of dates, and so I spent a lot of time playing video games. Okay, because in Final Fantasy VII, they'll at least listen to me. So you can see how this kind of becomes very closely identified with who you are. This is where that becomes challenging because video games by their nature are a constructed medium. Okay? They are created by developers to appease publishers who then turn around and try to sell them to you. Okay? And so they have all these different market factors influencing them. We'll come back to that in a moment. But I want to introduce to you two very important words. Okay? These are going to be your new fun time vocabulary pals. The first is the paradigm. In a game, in the study of any interactive media, a guy by the name of Lev Manovich comes up with this. There's a paradigm, okay? Think of it like when you have Legos as a kid. You got a bucket of Legos, and in that bucket are all these possibilities, all these bricks, okay? All these different choices you have. But you build different things with them, okay? Maybe you build a spaceship, maybe you build a dinosaur, maybe you build a robot, okay? Whatever it is you're trying to do, you are building something, you are creating something, and you have a certain kind of story and experience that goes with it. That's what we call the syntax, okay? That's not how that doesn't look like how it's pronounced, but trust me, that's how it's pronounced. The syntax. So we take these Legos, we put them together, we build a robot, that's our syntax. So we went from the paradigm, all the choices and options available to us, to create this. The problem is that video games often are not so much the infinite possibilities of the Lego set, but more like, here's a Lego set, you can build the Millennium Falcon, that's it. Okay? Maybe you can kind of move things around, maybe swap Chewie and on Han's heads, but that's about it. You're going to build the Millennium Falcon. That's what the parts are there for you to do. They want you to have a very specific experience. I have here a screenshot from the game Call of Duty Advanced Warfare. Side note, the only Call of Duty I like. But it got a lot of kind of criticism for this sequence where you're at a military funeral and you walk up to the casket and it says press X, or F in this case, press X to pay your respects. We have taken something as innately personal, as closely, as something that is core to our humanity as paying respects to the fallen, our friends, our family, whatever. And we've relegated it to a simple button press, because that's what the paradigm allows us to do. In this experience, to drive the story forward, we have to engage in this synthetic expression of our identity, essentially. And so video games, we can look at video games as kind of this concept where we are actually interacting with the game to tell a story, to create a syntax. But in reality, what we actually do is relatively limited by what the paradigm allows us to do. Okay? So that's a very important concept. So hold on to that for a moment, because it will come back. Like I tell you guys in class, every time something comes up, it'll probably come back later. So I did my dissertation. I'm not going to spend all night here telling you about how a 450-page document plays out. If you ever want to, I've got a copy of it in my office. It's great reading if you are an insomniac or just really have nothing else going on in your life. And there's all kinds of other things going on here, folks. Don't make that choice. Don't start reading dissertations. It's a bad way to go. But I'm going to sum up what I did. Basically, I conducted several forms of inquiry. I took the 5 best-selling games of 2012. I analyzed them by playing them. That's right, I played video games for homework. I talked about my experiences. I looked at the websites. I analyzed, who the pictures were, who was in the pictures, what they were doing, how this related to the game, all that sort of thing. I looked at the communities that surround them, what people are talking about, and I also talked to actual games journalists, because I wanted somebody who's kind of in the position where they're not quite developing the games, but they're also something more than just a fan. So basically, I found 3 major things. First, because I was looking for specific ideas of how video games handle identity, race, gender, and then because of the circumstances that were happening politically at the time, I also had to look at violence and militarism, because that's often an exercise of identity in the game world. And what I found is that basically in all of the games, these most popular games, we have a very limited choice in what we can do. Okay? For example, say that I wanted to play Madden NFL 13 and make a coach. I chose the Detroit Lions because I'm a native son of Michigan and I hate myself. So, I know that would play well with this crowd. And so I'm like, okay, I'm going to make a head coach that looks like me. I imported my weird mutant game face in there. And I chose, and my options were basically, do you want to be black or do you want to be white? Well, gee, I can choose all these other things, but no. If I'm a coach, I have one of 2 options. What if I am a young Hispanic youth and I want to experience what it's like to be an NFL head coach, or an Asian youth, okay? Or, a woman. You can't do any of those things. Your choices are black guy or white guy. Now, to be fair, it's nice that they give you that option, but you're still relatively limited in what you can do, okay? And so, the argument will be, some of you will say, well, there's not really a representation outside, there's really nobody else in the league, in the NFL, who fits, outside of those 2 boxes. My counterpoint is, so what? We have this infinite digital canvas. Video games are held up as this infinite digital canvas with which we can interact. And yet, we still choose to have these elements in it. That choice is very, very important. If you wanted to be anybody other than kind of a generic male figure, you were really kind of stuck unless you're playing Just Dance. Just Dance was kind of the outlier in a lot of this stuff, and that was the one that made me exhaust the fastest. And even in terms of what you do in the games, you're relatively limited. Play Assassin's Creed 3. There's a part in the game where you have to assassinate somebody. Press X to assassinate somebody. And that's literally what it says. And you can't do anything. Like, what if, for example, I have a change of heart? I'm an assassin who decides to take a different path. No, you gotta stab this guy. Stab him good. Otherwise, you're not going forward. Okay, game. I'll stab this guy. But only because you told me to, and also because you made me. So we're relatively limited in the choices we have, the options we have. Okay, and usually if we come into conflict with something, our option is basically to kill it. Race and gender, again, marginalized both in terms of the games themselves, but I thought it was kind of interesting when I looked at the advertisements, the websites, there weren't really very many women in there. And when they did show up, they were, how do I want to put this delicately? They were not there to be prized for their abilities or intelligence. They were there primarily to be attractive, okay? And even when a character was kind of portrayed as a warrior or something interesting, like in Assassin's Creed 3, they're still brought with it a host of other problems. Here's a character named Jillian, who was an Irish assassin who came to America, and she lures men in with her feminine wiles and then kills them. Okay? Here's Alsuns, a Shawnee warrior who is, hot-tempered and violent and savage. And she's Native American, okay? So there's a whole bunch of racial issues going on here, too. When they present her, and she's wearing an outfit, I don't know if you guys are familiar with I can't remember if she's Pawnee or Shawnee, but either way, it doesn't matter. Because there is no Native American woman in the history, and especially in that time period, who dresses the way Alsuns does. She's got this low-cut top that goes down to about here, bare midriff, and she's leaning at the camera, okay? It's like, hey fellas, how you doing? Okay? So there's a very clear sort of demographic they're trying to reach, and there's a very clear kind of position that women are put in. So women are kind of marginalized, people of other races are kind of marginalized, the white male experience is kind of privileged. If you are a non-white person, you're probably a villain at best, or an athlete or something like that. And I also found that, again, their primary way of interacting with the world was violence, okay? If I wanted to play Call of Duty, Black Ops 2, which is one of the other ones I played, and I wanted to do anything other than murder the hordes of people running at me with machetes, no, too bad. And the worst part was I played it on easy so I could get through as much of the game as I could. They would literally just run at me and wait for me to shoot them. It's just like, hey, you gonna shoot me? No? Okay, I'll come back to you in a minute. Okay, no? Okay. So we're relatively limited in what we can do, okay? The paradigm is pretty much dictating that we have to do a certain thing. And so I had some main takeaways. First off, if you look at the way games are marketed, you look at the way games are presented, they reflect certain cultural values. It's true, okay? This is, we have to understand that video games are not created in a vacuum. They're created by people who have their own kind of perspectives, their own backgrounds, their own baggage, okay? And a lot of times they're created specifically for economic reasons. We'll come back to that in a moment, okay? That's the cultural forces part of this. Second, the options that we have shape the syntag, the experience that players have with the game. So if I'm very closely tying my identity to this game, if I'm very closely identifying with Connor or whoever I am in the game, I basically can only do what the game allows me to do. I can't, for example, make Connor decide to give up the fun life of assassinating and just go and be a farmer somewhere. That's not an option, okay? It'd be a boring game anyway, but it's not an option. I don't have that choice. It's very much meant to drive me down a particular path. And the options available determine what I get to do and what I don't get to do. And these external forces shape the options. This is very, very important. When you look at the way games are marketed, they are marketed to a very specific purpose. I have here a screenshot from a now pulled down website for the game Medal of Honor Warfighter, or something like that. They all kind of blur together after a while. And what this was essentially touting the fact that this game carries with it certain licensing. Sort of like you would license a car for a Gran Turismo or something like that. This one, you licensed guns, weapons. And they like, just look how cool this is. You're using this officially licensed gun. It's got the real sounds and all that. After the Newtown shooting, they pulled this down because it turned out that the companies making the guns for the game are also making the guns used in that. But this happens, okay? There are clear economic forces at work here. You have to make a game that sells. And there's a lot of resistance to try anything different, okay? How many of you have noticed, those who play games, where are my gamers at? Okay, how many of you have noticed that most of your protagonists are white guys with short brown hair? Yeah, okay, most of them. We can run off a list right now. Let's do it. Nathan Drake, very much so. Italian from Middle Earth, slightly longer hair, still a white dude. Okay. The default character in Saints Row, the default character in most games, if they have a creative character, is kind of in that mode. Commander Shepard, the default version, even though it's not the good version. FemShep forever. Right? Some of you are like, yeah, okay. I was hoping that would get a little bit more of a reaction, but whatever. What's that? Grand Theft Auto, absolutely. Okay. Yeah, so we see it again and again and again. Okay. And the reason is not so much that the developers want to put them in there, right? It's that these things are focus grouped to within an inch of their life. And what the focus groups keep returning, because they keep talking to mostly white dudes, is that they want characters who look that way. Okay? So we have a pretty limited representation of what's in the games themselves. We can talk more about this in the questions. I want to keep moving on. So because players form this very, very close identity, and when I looked at how the community talked about things, they're talking about the weapons in Call of Duty like they're their own weapons. They're talking about, I feel like I'm really there with Connor as he's, traipsing through through New England in the winter. Okay, so there's this really close kind of identification. There's this sort of feeling that you're actually part of what's going on, and that really drives things forward. So again, this becomes sort of a problem because if you're really closely identified with this, you're really kind of closely identified with what the game wants you to be. Okay. And these cultural forces do, in fact, influence the discourse in games. In Call of Duty, the talk is all about guns. Okay, I could every single thing was about some sort of weapon or killing, and it was this notion of I'm getting really good at this thing, and I can tell I'm getting good because the body count is higher than when I started. Okay, and that's kind of a weird position to be in, especially when you look at the website for Call of Duty. I hate to keep picking on Call of Duty, but I'm gonna. If you look at the website for Call of Duty, they essentially treat it like a sport. Okay, this virtual killing, this virtual slaughter, basically, is treated like a sport. I'm not like, and let me be very, very clear. I'm not sitting here clutching my pearls and wringing my hands and talking about video game violence. I think that video game violence is fantastic. Okay, I am so excited for the new Mortal Kombat. You guys even have no idea. They did that shot on Conan O'Brien where like one of the fatalities is like a guy slicing a dude's head in half. I'm like, yeah, all right, let's do this. So I'm not here saying that video games are going to cause violence or anything like that, but this is very representative of a lot of cultural things. And we do talk about things that do influence our perspective and do influence our worldview. The media is a huge part of that, and video games are part of that, and this all adds up over time. It's like sediment in a river. You build it up eventually, you build up enough of it, and eventually it changes the course of the river, right? How do you like these analogies? The Legos, the river, this all working for you? Okay, great. All right, so I'm going to walk you through two models really quickly. If you want to know more about them, I'll be real surprised. But these models are based on my research. The first is the cultural paradigmatic model, and this essentially is kind of my conception of how the video game culture works. We start off by first off assuming that culture as we understand it, American culture, human culture, all these things exist in the background. All of our discussions of what identity is, who belongs where, our expectations, all that sorts of things are lingering in the background, influencing every step of this chain. And it is a reciprocal chain. In fact, if anything, I didn't put enough arrows connecting these two things. Game creators create games, but they're influenced by the players who create demand for those games. And the gamers themselves create the culture, and certain cultures dictate what sells and what doesn't. I mean, if you look at the best-selling games, you see a very clear trend. A lot of shooting, a lot of guns, a lot of violence, a lot of sequels, so on and so forth, because that's what gamer culture demands. That's what they want. That's what the market will bear. Okay? And a lot of that is driven by our cultural expectations. We're now living in a world where the new Batman game, this actually just came out today, is rated M for mature. Batman. Okay? One of the most child-friendly, beloved heroes of all time. I know there's like some dark Frank Miller stuff, we're not going to go there, but kids love Batman, and the new Batman game is rated M for mature. And people are stoked about this. And I'm sitting there thinking, when DC Comics tries to make Batman dark and gritty, it's always hilarious. So I think I might actually want to play this now. Okay? So there is this cultural forces, and it's exerting on all sides, and all sides are influencing each other. It's creating this sort of weird mishmash of an outcome that really has some significant problems with it. The second model I want to talk about is kind of my conception of gamer identity and where it comes from. Now we can't ignore these external factors that guide what players do. What gets lost a lot in the scapegoating of violence in video games is that a lot of other external factors really do drive violence. Home life, economic background, all these sorts of different things. So we can't take those out of the equation, but we do definitely see that identity changes through the lens of video games. I don't want to isolate video games out specifically, because you could probably say this about a lot of things in culture, but video games I find particularly interesting. So we start off with our personal self, right? This is me, this is who I am. This is I'm influenced by my family, my religion, whatever. I come into contact with the paradigmatic elements of the video game, and now I have three selves. I have my personal self in terms of how I'm expressing myself through the game, what I'm doing in the game, what I'm enjoying. I have my virtual self. This is my avatar. This is who represents me. This is what I'm having them do. Okay, especially fun in games like Mass Effect or Dragon Age, where you're agonizing over these decisions. Or my personal favorite, Telltale's The Walking Dead, where every decision you make is the worst possible decision. But that's our virtual self. That's who we become through the lens, through the paradigm of these games. I hit X, oh well, so-and-so dies. What are we going to do? And then there's the community self. When we come into contact with other people who play the game, other people who are gamers, how do we identify ourselves? How do we represent ourselves? Are there certain sort of hierarchies we have to fit into, certain sort of social expectations or obligations? Okay? All of these things create kind of this sort of multifaceted identity, just like our normal concept of identity, but now we have this mediated virtual influence. And it can be good, because I'll tell you right now, gamers have done a lot of good for the world. Okay? I don't want to stand up here and be like, again, I don't want to wring my hands and clutch my pearls, because I think video games are pretty great. Otherwise I wouldn't be, spending a lot of my time playing them. But it also has caused a lot of problems. And this is one of the first problems, okay? So I want to kind of like bring things home by talking about where gamer identity is headed in 2015. And one of the chief problems is this. You guys been following video games for any length of time, you knew this was coming. There is a significant degree of sexism and backlash against, sort of exploring different cultures, different experiences in video games. And it comes from this kind of old guard who are so closely identified themselves with being a gamer that one could argue they're probably a little bit frightened that the idea that things are broadening, things are changing, and the industry is going with it. They're a little bit frightened by that, okay? And so, most people would say, oh, that's kind of weird, maybe I should go take up macrame or something, but no. There has been a significant, prolonged harassment campaign against not only women in video games, but women in the tech industry in general, okay? This has been going on for a long time. It's especially gotten big recently, but it's been going on for years, okay? There's a reason that women are historically underrepresented in tech, and especially historically underrepresented in video games. Right now, the numbers are basically something, and again, I don't want to throw a lot of facts and figures at you, mostly because I don't have them written down up here, but the numbers are basically something like 80% or close to 80% of the workforce in the video games industry is men, okay? And that's actually gone down. That's actually after female representation has increased, okay? So we still have a very significantly lopsided kind of thing, and a lot of it could be construed as sort of this thing where girls were never really encouraged for the longest time to get into computers, science, technology, games, etc. That was seen as like a guy's thing. The ladies in the room, has that ever happened to you? A couple of you are nodding, yeah, like this is something where why would you do that? That's for boys. And that has always been foreign to me because, and again, like I look at the way I play games, if I can get real for a second, and I know I'm not the only one, because one of the guys I talked to in the interviews I did expressed the same thing. When I play video games, I usually play as the girl, because the girls were the best. Chun-Li, right? Princess Peach, floating around, yeah. Okay, that was the best. Why would you play Mario 2 as anybody else? Some people are like, well, Toad, no, Toad sucks. Yeah, you know what I'm talking about. Peach is the best. She's still the best in Mario 3D World until you get Rosalina. She can do the spin thing. That's pretty cool too. Okay, those were usually the characters I gravitated towards. And we talked about this. And he said, I think that might have influenced some of my more feminist leanings. I'm going to hear it right now. Say feminism is not a dirty word. Okay. Yeah. You can clap. I don't care. Go for it. Thank you for that half-hearted applause. All right. And so he's like, I think this influenced a lot of my feminist leanings. And as soon as he said that, you know what? I think it did too. Okay? I think that if there's a certain read of video games where it has the potential to be this thing where anybody can be anything. Okay? One of the greatest moments in video game history is when you played the first Metroid, and if you beat it in a certain amount of time, this cool robot bounty hunter person, actually a lady, Samus Aran. And it's Samus, not Samus. I don't care what anybody says, it's Samus. Okay? But we still don't necessarily see that in the industry as a whole. The industry still has in its mind this image of who they're marketing to, and it's a young, straight male. Okay? So we see ads like this thing for Ebony. I don't really know what Ebony is. It's some browser game. But the ads are really more important than the game itself because every single one has some submissive lady in sort of a reclining clothes saying, "Come play, my lord." Okay? It's the saddest thing. The Last of Us Okay, this game comes out, it's critically acclaimed. I didn't really care for it, but whatever, to each their own. But they had, the publishers, Naughty Dog, had to actually fight tooth and nail to get the main character, Ellie, on the front of the box. She's considered the most important part of the game to them. But the focus group people said, well, you know, we focus group and the male character should really be up there. They had to fight to get their own character from their own game to be prominently displayed, to look like that. Okay? How ridiculous is that? Anita Sarkeesian, who actually will be coming here later this semester. I'm really, really excited to say that. A feminist scholar, has been doing this for years. Well, she'll point out different tropes in things like toys, movies, comics, etc. Doing this for years, never had a problem, until she started pointing out, you know, sexist tropes in video games. And she became, along with a lot of other women, the target of this protracted online harassment, to the point where one of her recent lectures was actually canceled because of a death threat. A guy threatened to carry out this mass sort of murder situation over video games. And so when we talk about gamer identity, this is the kind of stuff that makes me, honestly, and I'm being real up here because I feel we can be real in this this circumstance. This is a real room. Okay, touching it, it's real. Okay, and if I'm being real, this is stuff that makes me question: do I want to call myself a gamer? Okay. And so a woman by the name of Leigh Alexander actually wrote an article saying, "Are gamers dead?" Okay, and the reason why is this. The demographics are broadening. She argues that we have a lot more women, we have a lot more people, you know, minorities, we have a lot more people different ages, all these different things playing video games. This image we have in our head of a gamer, this young white man, okay? They're not really the audience anymore. You don't have to cater to them. You can do whatever you want. Guess how that turned out? Guess how people took, guess how a lot of so-called gamers, self-professed gamers felt about saying that that gamer was dead, their identity was dead. They didn't like it very much, so they you know, accused her of all these different things. They, you know, dug into her Twitter. They dug all these things trying to prove that she's, you know, she's sexist, she's racist, and so on and so forth. But all she's trying to say is that the market is broadening, because it is. Okay? If we look right now, about 59% of the population of America plays video games. Probably more, honestly. I think that number is actually low. And if we look at the actual data put out by the Entertainment Software Association, women over the age of 18 actually make a much larger part of the game-playing audience than do boys under the age of 18. Think about that for a second. Think about how that flies in the face of the stereotypes. And yet it's true. Ladies, how many of you here play video games? Okay? Those of you who aren't raising your hands, I'm going to say how many of you play Candy Crush, how many of you play Angry Birds, how many of you play Farmville, how many of you played, what else, Trivia Crack, how many of you played any number of games on your phone. How about that? Okay, congratulations, you're gamers too, ladies. Okay, the point is that the definition is changing, it's broadening. These new technologies are facilitating that. And that's exciting, it's opening up new markets. It's opening up things, you know, I know people in their 60s, their 70s, who just love Candy Crush. They love it. It's the dumbest game, but they love it. Okay? Because it speaks to them. It's tailored to them. And how refreshing is that? We're also seeing gamer identity kind of take over, where the gamers are actually kind of controlling the media they consume to an extent. It used to be that media was designed for gamers. Now gamers are kind of picking and choosing who they want to get their media from. And all I have to do is point at this guy. How many know who that guy is on top there? That's PewDiePie, right? I don't really know what PewDiePie is. I know of him, but I tried watching one of his videos. I couldn't do it. I couldn't do it. But he's incredibly important. Something like 4 billion YouTube views, 14 million subscribers. Made $4 million last year. 4 million from talking about video games. He's the most popular YouTuber in the world. And all he does is talk about video games. There's a market. That gamer identity is coming out. Okay? They want that. They want somebody to talk specifically. There's something about PewDiePie that speaks specifically, especially to the younger demographic. Okay? Kids love PewDiePie. Again, I'm old. I don't get it. But I'm glad he's there. Okay? In fact, the YouTube thing has been a significant sort of push to really kind of create this media that is specifically tailored to the gamer identity. We're also seeing a lot of changes in how, you know, again, I talked a lot in my research about how the best-selling games are, you know, mostly driven by white guys, etc. But if you look kind of down the road a little bit, you start to see that we are seeing a lot of changes in terms of who's actually being represented. The Walking Dead by Telltale Games. I'm going to say it right now, the best version of The Walking Dead, period. I will brook no argument. The TV show got old about 4 seasons ago. The comics got old about 100 issues ago. But this game is fantastic, and part of it is that the main character in the game series is basically not somebody you normally see the perspective of. Okay? In the first season of the game, you play as Lee Everett. Okay? He's about a middle-aged black man. He's a history professor. It's sort of vaguely defined, like he might have gotten to a tiff with his wife and may have murdered her and her lover or whatever. It's all kind of vague. But he's going on his way to prison, and the zombie apocalypse happens, so on and so forth. And essentially, he takes care of this young girl named Clementine, okay, whose parents are missing. He decides to help her find them. And so they go on, and so you get this kind of weird, this weird sort of position where not only are you playing as somebody you don't normally get to play as, but you're playing from a perspective of a father, a caretaker. And so all your decisions are made from the perspective of what will Clementine think. Until, and this is where I'm going to spoil this, so I'm sorry in advance, until something happens at the end of Season 1 where Lee dies. And now Season 2 is Clementine, a young black girl herself, now going through the same thing, trying to learn trying to use what she's learned from Lee to essentially make her way through this zombie nightmare. And she ends up being the smartest person she comes into contact with, which is pretty much part of the course of Walking Dead. And this is amazing because now we have, games are mostly a power fantasy, or expressing this idea of identity through power. What the guys at Telltale did is essentially completely flip the script. You are not the most powerful person in the universe. You are a young girl. You are not the biggest, you are not the fastest, you're the smartest, but you're not any of the things we normally associate with video games. And so your entire worldview, your entire approach to situations changes. And that's fascinating. That's something that we haven't really gotten in terms of the really big releases. It's happening in the independent scene, it's happening in the downloadable scene. We have games like Sunset Overdrive, Skyrim, Dragon Age that offer these robust character customization options. You can make your person be whatever you want. Saints Row. I love Saints Row for this very reason. You want your person to be kind of like you? Okay. Do you want to be a 7-foot-tall silver god? Great. Okay? The game lets you do that. And we're seeing more and more games, rather than try to kind of put a focus group approved character in the lead role, you're allowing you the chance to kind of create a character yourself. And that's really, really cool too. But again, you're limited by those paradigmatic options. I can create this character, but if the game doesn't allow me to make this particular skin color, or have this particular hair, or have this, in terms of this kind of particular gender transitioning or whatever, I'm basically stuck. I can't be necessarily who I want to be unless the game has allowed me to. Okay? And that's a really, really key distinction to make. We're also seeing some pretty interesting changes in the independent development scene. We have games like Dysphoria, which is in the lower left, created by a developer named Anna Anthropy. Anna Anthropy is a transition female, and the game is essentially about her experiences going through gender reassignment surgery. Okay? And so it's kind of using these abstract gameplay experiences to tell the player what that's like. Okay? It's basically like WarioWare, but about things that, like actual sort of human issues instead of trying to put a finger up somebody's nose. Okay? We have Gone Home, which addresses much, and I'm not going to spoil Gone Home, because I think everybody in this room should play. How many of you here have played Gone Home? Okay, homework, go play Gone Home. There is no combat in Gone Home, there is no fighting. It's been called a walking simulator, that's not inaccurate. But it tells a story, a very uniquely human story. It tells a story about growing up, about figuring out what your identity is. Okay? And at the end, I was on pins and needles. I was more invested in that than I've ever been in maybe any other video game. And I almost cried at the end. And that's incredible. And it does it all without a single bullet being fired. We have games like IDAR, which is just weird. It's like this weird basketball, soccer thing, and then like Twitter messes with it. It's cool. But we're seeing all these cool things. And again, independent development can do this. The major sort of developers, these multi-million-dollar franchises, when a publisher's looking at spending like $100 million in promoting Destiny, okay? Which Destiny's a fine game, don't get me wrong. But they can't take a lot of risks with it, okay? It's got to be shooty-shooty. It's got to be kind of like this. You got to have the loot, all that kind of stuff, right? Here, with an independent development where the budgets are much, much smaller, developers don't have to worry about clearing a certain number of copies to make a profit. They just kind of create stories that are more unique. And so things like Steam Greenlight and the indie stores on like the PlayStation, the Xbox, so on and so forth, are kind of becoming this haven for essentially the video game equivalent of independent music or independent film. Okay? Stories that are much more personal, much more sort of kind of narrowly based, but still really, really interesting in using those unique elements, those paradigmatic elements, to tell a story that is really not going to be told any other way, or really couldn't be told any other way. But on the other hand, it's a matter of finding the audience, and sometimes that's hard for an independent developer. Okay? And also, if you're an independent developer, you're not making that much money. So again, the industry does have some challenges to overcome. So how do we do that? Okay, I'm going to kind of bring it home here. And I put Mega Man on there because I had no idea what else to put on there, and I'm like, this thing needs some Mega Man. So for all the misery, there he is, standing in the darkness. So where are games headed? The short answer is, I don't really know. Nobody really knows, okay? It wasn't that far off that virtual reality seemed like this thing that we could never attain. Now we're basically, Facebook is invested in it, okay? It's going to happen. Virtual reality is going to become a thing. But I do know the way we look about games, the way we look at games, the way we understand them, that kind of has to change. We need to have a new paradigm ourselves. We need to start looking not so much just at our games fun or anything like that, because let's talk about games being fun. They are, but we also need to look at who's making them, who profits. Okay, what cultural forces are at play here. Okay, analyze them not just as this social problem or this social evil or just is this worth my $60, but analyze them as art. There's a great debate that used to go on. The great film critic Roger Ebert would dip his toes into this every so often. Are video games art? That's a question I don't really feel like answering, because it's a question that we would take another hour to do. But we can make the argument that they are a narrative medium, they're a communicative medium, they are capable of evoking feelings and ideas and concepts. And we can analyze them as such, we can appreciate them as such, and we should. So we can critically examine who's making games, we can critically examine the representation behind the scenes, what that might influence the paradigm that are influencing our identities as gamers, as players. We can examine the choices of what is left in and what is not, because let's be real, when everything in a game is put in there for a reason, it doesn't just organically appear, okay? This criminal or this bystander isn't there just because they wandered in, okay? It's not Wreck-It Ralph. They're there because the programmer put them there. And so why did they put them there? What is the cultural reason they put them there, okay? That's a really important thing to keep in mind. So we study the rhetoric of games, how they make their arguments, how they talk about things, the ideas they convey, and the borders they put around our identity. We can create something that's much deeper than the way we understand games now. We can truly embrace them as this next level, beautiful art form that they really and truly, I really truly believe they are. Okay? At least that's my hope anyway. So that's basically my spiel. So like I said, we're going to spend the rest of the time talking about video games and such, and I think we got some stuff to give away. Do you want to do that now, or?
If you want to do questions first.
Yeah, let's do questions first, and then we'll do this for however long. I've got about 14 minutes. We could probably go a little over if you want. It's up to you. So just basically ask them, and then when you get sick of asking them, we'll stop. But yeah, that's basically it. So thank you. You can applaud later if you want. I don't really. Yeah, thank you. Yeah. Okay. I wasn't really asking, but that's wonderful. Thank you so much. All right, questions. Okay, raise your hand. I don't know if there's like a way you want to do this.
Just stand up and talk really loud.
Okay, yeah, go ahead. And tell me your name too. I want to see, I know a lot of you, but I don't know all of you, and I don't know you, so please tell me your name.
Josh.
Hello, Josh.
Hello. I guess my question is, we're talking about independent developers and online gaming as that sport. I know the debate is always coming up of what if hard copies of games completely disappear.
Okay.
I guess my question is, if that happens or when it happens, do you think that will help or hinder the independent developer if all games are
So you're asking basically if the kind of the push towards a digital future is going to really help or harm the independent developer. I think that what we've seen is that the idea that there is a lower barrier to entry to getting your games out there through things like Steam, Good Old Games, etc., that has only helped the independent developer. It's really kind of created the independent development market. And you are seeing Nintendo, Sony, Microsoft really embracing indie developers in a way that they hadn't before. And largely it is because digital distribution is cheaper. You don't have to print discs, you don't have to print a box, you don't have to print a manual, you don't have to ship things, you don't have to pay retailers, all that stuff. It's all just on the store, you download it, you pay for it, it's a much quicker, cleaner transaction. So if we move to an all digital future, which is still a long ways off, I just want to say that. It's always funny to hear like people in the games media who are on like New York and California where all this like amazing broadband is happening talk about like, oh, it's coming, we're not gonna buy games in the store anymore. And then in Wisconsin, where we're like stuck with Time Warner, and you like have to pay a lot to get any sort of decent speed. You're like, okay, yeah, guys. I think that's only going to hasten it along. But the other thing, this is where I want to point out I'm not a developer. I've talked to a lot of them, but I'm not one myself. My feeling is basically that it will not hurt. But with everything going digital, it might kind of crowd the marketplace or make it harder to find those independent games. So that's where things get challenging, and that's where creating sort of this welcoming sort of environment for independent developers, which I think a lot of the console manufacturers and Steam have been pretty good at, is really going to be important. Does that answer your question? Okay, more or less. That's what I strive for, more or less. Other questions? Yes. Hi. Hi, Olivia.
Hi.
You're here. You said you would be.
I did. So I'm wondering about, I want to talk a little bit more about gamer identity.
About gamer identity, okay.
And art culture. So I'm wondering, since we do have a culture of females that are more like executive leaders, there are, that those exist in society, how come there isn't games to reflect like female characters as like protagonists or leaders? Is it a fact of a reflection of our culture, or is it that gamer culture doesn't allow for that either? Or is it a mixture?
I'd say it's a mixture. So you're asking basically why there aren't more games that feature female protagonists, especially in like, leadership roles, something like that. Not just, bang bang guns toting.
And why is it that the gamer culture isn't being inclusive of that?
Okay, and so you're asking, is it gamer culture or is it our culture? And I think you're right, and that's a little bit of both. So, if you look at film, for example, video games are not the only one where most of the protagonists are straight white males, right? Most films are too. In fact, there's still this image, there's still this perception in Hollywood, in the film industry, that movies with women won't sell. To which all you have to do is say, idiots, look at Hunger Games, look at Frozen, look at The Heat, look at all these movies that are basically not only feature female protagonists, but are built for a female audience and are making just gangbusters. Like they literally cannot count money fast enough at Disney to keep up with Frozen. Okay? And so the question becomes, is that a cultural thing? Is that just like maybe a stodgy way of thinking? I think that it really is kind of representative of those underlying things in our culture, right? So we have this kind of idea in our culture that's still very sort of patriarchal, okay, for all the talk of feminism and that sort of thing. We've seen a lot of advancements, but there's still a lot of ways to go. Would you agree with that? Okay, great. So I'm on the right track. And so these are things that are just sort of innate, and they're not necessarily limited to any one industry. I do think that video games suffer from it particularly hard because there aren't as many prominent female developers, and there aren't as many prominent things for a lot of the reasons we stated. There just aren't that many women in the field to begin with. And if a woman's in the field, again, this is statistically speaking, she is more likely to be an artist or an HR person or something like that than an actual developer or programmer, okay? And so you do see women occasionally like Jade Raymond, Kim Swift, and of course you have a lot of developers on the independent scene who are women. Actually, the head, the sort of chief overseer, I'm not sure what her exact title was, of Saints Row, the last Saints Row game was female too. But that's still kind of the exception rather than the rule. And again, you see that movies parallel video games a lot. Like Catherine Bigelow is the only woman who's ever won Best Director, for example, right? There's aren't that many female directors. There should be, but for whatever reason, they just have a hard time kind of breaking through. It's the glass ceiling effect. So I'm rambling a little bit, but that's because this is sort of a question. I think that anytime we have like this sort of medium that reflects culture, any sort of artistic endeavor, which games, movies, music, etc. are, it's going to reflect not only the kind of cool parts of our culture, it's going to reflect the more negative aspects of our culture too. It's going to reflect that glass ceiling that exists that kind of holds women down. So I think that's why. I don't think it's necessarily endemic to that, to any one particular thing. We are seeing, again, we're seeing some changes in the video game industry. I was just reading this cool, this indie game that's coming out, and I can't remember the name of it, so if somebody knows this, shout it out, where you are essentially, you play a housekeeper, I'm going somewhere with this. You play a housekeeper during this sort of, and you're cleaning the house of this like really rich kind of billionaire influential political guy, and as you go through, you start to kind of learn, hey, there's like a coup going on. There's like a conflict going on in the city. It's like a civil war. And the guy that you're cleaning the house for is you like kind of like he gives you specific directions, like, okay, clean this room, don't go anywhere else. You sneak around, you kind of go through his personal effects, you start to find out more about it, and you start to actually gradually influence the course of the war. You can actually kind of influence how he operates. And this is set in like the 70s, right? So it's kind of like, it fits the time period, but it's kind of a unique way of kind of giving women this sort of agency within kind of these, historically constrained boxes that we haven't really seen them have in games before. I'm not doing it, it's a really cool idea. I'm not doing it justice right now because I'm just like rattling off the top of my head. But it's neat. And I want to see more of that, okay? I mean, the old thing is like this notion that, well, she's a powerful, strong female character because she's, running around with guns, she's like, kicking ass and taking names. That's all well and good, but how is she dressed? Why is she dressed like that? Look at Lara Croft up until recently, right? She was not dressed to raid tombs. Indiana Jones ain't running around in short shorts, okay? He's wearing pants. They changed that in the most recent Tomb Raider game, okay? But they're still kind of like, even as we have these empowered, strong female characters, they're still pretty much portrayed in a way that kind of fits sort of patriarchal value of women as objects and so on and so forth. That's a long, rambling answer. I kind of forgot your original question, to be honest with you, but I hope that kind of answered it. I'm just saying this stuff is really deeply innate, and it's hard to say that it's just gamer culture, because gamer culture is heavily influenced by the culture at large.
I'm
right?
thinking that it's like, well, if the females don't feel like they're entitled either to the culture, then they can't really necessarily become more well represented because they don't
Right.
feel like they're entitled to be part of the culture.
And I think you're right. The notion that you don't feel like you belong, you don't feel like you're entitled, you don't really necessarily get that representation. I think that's a very valid point. My feeling though is that we're in an age now, and I'm glad I lived to see it, where women are like, we're tired of not being
Then
entitled to the culture.
Online harassment.
And that's that does lead to the backlash, that does lead to the harassment. But God bless the women who are standing strong in the face of it. They're they're kind of the ones that are really giving me hope for the future of the industry. I'm getting really kind of weirdly like Spartacus up here. Thank you. Other questions? Can be about just the industry in general, what we talked about, anything like that. I know you guys have some. Yes, Taylor.
What's your favorite video game?
My favorite video game. That's a great question. So I'm going to answer it in several parts. My all-time favorite video game is Mega Man 2. That's just reality. That's just fact. It is perfect. Favorite series, of course, Mega Man. I'm a huge Mario geek to the point like it's almost unhealthy. Like Mario Kart, anything that has the little mustache guy in it, I'm going to play it. I'm a big fan. I really enjoyed BioShock up until the most recent, the Burial at Sea stuff. I thought that was going out with a whimper, not a bang. That was going out with a whimper. There's a lot of stuff like right now I'm enjoying Evolve a lot. I really like the idea of, thank you, yeah, Evolve. Woo, let's say names. Let's say names of games. Evolve. Dragon Age, Assassin's Creed,
Majora's Mask.
We want things that people are excited about. Fallout 4, maybe it could be happening. But yeah, Evolve was cool. I really like how that works. You have one in the back. You can yell something out. Everybody else has. What's that? Oh, okay. You don't think Fallout 4 is coming? Well, they've got something planned at E3. We'll see. But yeah, I'm a big fan. I'm not like a big kind of blood and guts guy. I mean, I don't mind violence. I'm not really like a big shooter kind of guy, but Evolve is pretty cool because it kind of takes it's like hide and seek, but one of you is like just huge savage monster, and it's awesome. And like the rest of you are like these weird degenerates, like this cyborg Russian guy, and this like like grizzled old coal miner guy. It's awesome. What else we got? Yes. Josh, hello. Hi again.
I have a lot of questions.
Good, please.
Okay, taking everything in effect that you said, what is your favorite video game world that you wouldn't mind living in?
My favorite video game world I wouldn't mind living in? The cop-out answer is the Mushroom Kingdom, but I think there's something weird about the Mushroom Kingdom. It's really stuff there. I really so you know, as much as I will stand up here and talk about how awesome Princess Peach is, and I stand by that, she's not a very good ruler. And to the point where I have created in my own head this scenario in which she's kind of a figurehead and there's like a council of toads that do most of the governing. Because otherwise, how could you get anything done? But my Mario fan fiction aside, it's just like everything's too happy there. So eventually I kind of want to like tone it down a little bit. You don't want to live in Grand Theft Auto times. I mean, I'm from Michigan. I've been to Detroit. I can say that, by the way. You guys can't make that joke. I can make that joke. Okay. You're really putting me on the spot here. I think there's something kind of. I like the idea of living in a world where you can kind of. You're not going to get killed, right? There's kind of cool stuff happening. Everybody kind of gets to do different things. So, you know, I like the idea of like maybe kind of like the Matrix-y type world from Saints Row 4 where it's just like, you know, whatever, I can just jump 30 feet in the air. It doesn't matter. It's all aliens. It doesn't matter. Yeah, that's kind of cool. I like that. But yeah, it's hard. It's hard. You know, honestly, I was going to say Mega Man, but then I'm like, no, because that doesn't end well for humanity. If you look at the Mega Man X storyline, it does not go well. We're all basically forced underground while robots fight on the surface. And then we all die off later. It's sad. Other questions? So that's a fun question. Yeah. Sorry, I didn't have a good answer for you. Yes.
Last one.
Oh, this after we got.
Yeah.
We got two more. Okay, we got two more.
Okay.
So okay. So and then you had your hand up back. Okay, cool.
Red versus blue, yay or nay?
Red versus blue. You mean the concept or the web series?
The series.
I really like Red versus Blue. I've fallen out with it. Like not so much that I didn't like it. I got older. I got busy. I couldn't really keep up with it. But some of those early sketches were some of the funniest things. Like my girlfriend at the time, she's now my wife. We would sit and watch them, and she wasn't even like a big Halo person, but she thought they were hilarious. I actually do from time to time show the point counterpoint of whether or not you should get a tattoo in my classes. It's kind of an example of machinima, because I still think that's one of the funniest things ever, and really explains kind of the issues with tattoo culture sometimes. It's like you think it's cool now, but you know, something like, you know, look back at yourself 16 years ago. Were you smart? No, you were an idiot. So 16 years from now, do you think you're going to be any smarter? Like that has like influenced a lot of my worldview and the way I think. So I'm going to say yay in general. I just can't speak to the more recent stuff. And I think Brianna, what's up back there? How you doing?
If you could create any video game ever, what would that be?
Like you're giving me like full reign to create my own video game?
Yeah. Especially after all your research.
Especially after all my research. So I'm kind of enamored with this concept. I love the idea of role-playing games, and I love the idea of this idea, you know, creating choices and telling stories. But I'm trying to think of a way to make that interesting, and you know, trying to create a story that like is actually compelling and relevant depending on the choices you make. It gets really, really challenging. So I'm just going to not answer that question and say if I could make any video game in the world, it would be Elite Beat Agents 2. Yes, for the three of you that got that, you know why. That game demands a sequel. Failing that, Mega Man Legends free. Mostly because these ideas are already pretty much ready to go, and part of doing all this research is I have lost all creativity. If you gave me like some time, I could think of a better answer, but those are the kind of things I would make. I also, I used to be able to like draw like I think these elaborate ideas for like role-playing games and stories and characters, and they're all pretty ridiculous now. But I think what would be really cool though is to create like a bounty hunter type game with like a female protagonist, and you're actually going out hunting bounties like in outer space or something like that. And like, you know, I'm gonna go after this guy, bring him in, I get this much money, I can upgrade my stuff, I'm gonna go out and do this guy. And it's just like this kind of story. Like the idea I essentially have is you went through bounty hunter school as a young woman, thinking that was like going to be this cool thing in the galaxy, but then like peace happens, and like the people who get like English majors get more jobs than bounty hunters for like the first time in recorded history. So you're just kind of like taking any job that comes just to kind of keep your ship flying, keep yourself fed, you know, that kind of stuff. That to me is kind of interesting. Like I love the idea of like making a game like in science fiction terms, but what if you're like a student just out of college trying to deal? I think that would be relevant to a lot of people in this room. So that like maybe that's kind of where I would go with it. All right, and I guess that's it. So thank you all for asking questions, and thank you all for being here.